Few books in human history have left such a catastrophic mark on the world as Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. This wasn't just a memoir or a political manifesto. It was a blueprint for genocide, a roadmap to war, and a window into one of history's most destructive minds. Yet understanding this book isn't about glorifying its author or his ideology. It's about understanding how hatred takes root, how extremism spreads, and how democracies can fail when warning signs are ignored. The question we must answer isn't whether Mein Kampf caused the Holocaust and World War II. That connection is proven beyond doubt. Rather, it's how a single book could play such a role, why so many fail to take its warnings seriously, and what lessons this history holds for us today. Because if there's one lesson we must learn from this evil book, it's this. When extremists tell you who they are and what they plan to do, believe them. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't dismiss their words as mere rhetoric. History shows us that the most dangerous people often announce their intentions openly, and the world's greatest tragedies happen when we choose not to listen. The story of Mein Kampf begins with Hitler's greatest failure. In November 1923, Adolf Hitler was not yet the dictator who would plunge the world into war. He was a 34-year-old political agitator leading a small extremist party in Munich, Germany. By most measures, his life had been one disappointment after another. Born in Austria in 1889, Hitler had dreamed of becoming a painter but was rejected twice from art school. He spent years living in poverty, drifting through homeless shelters, selling postcards for pocket change. When World War I broke out in 1914, Hitler finally found purpose in military service. He volunteered for the German army, served as a message runner on the Western Front, was wounded twice, and earned medals for bravery. The war gave Hitler meaning, but then came Germany's devastating defeat in November 1918. Like millions of Germans, Hitler couldn't accept that Germany had lost. Instead, he embraced a dangerous lie called the stab-in-the-back myth. This false conspiracy theory claimed that Germany didn't lose on the battlefield. Instead, Jews and communists betrayed the nation from within. This baseless idea became the foundation of everything Hitler would later write and do. After the war, Hitler discovered his extraordinary gift for public speaking. In smoke-filled beer halls in Munich, he would deliver speeches lasting 2 hours or more, building to crescendos of rage that left audiences exhausted and electrified. He understood crowd psychology instinctively, knowing when to whisper, when to shout, when to pause for effect. He gave people what they wanted, someone to blame for their suffering, someone who understood their anger, someone who promised to make Germany great again. Under Hitler's leadership, the Nazi Party grew rapidly. By November 1923, inspired by Mussolini's successful march on Rome, Hitler attempted his own coup to seize power. On November 8th, he stormed into a Munich beer hall with armed men, fired a pistol into the ceiling, and declared a national revolution. But his attempted coup crumbled the next morning when his followers met armed police. 16 Nazis and 4 policemen were killed in a brief firefight. Hitler was arrested and charged with high treason, a crime that could carry the death penalty. By all logic, his political career should have ended there. But what came next would transform everything and give birth to the most dangerous book in history. Hitler was imprisoned at Landsberg, a fortress-like prison that actually gave him relative comfort. He had a private room, wore his own clothes, and received hundreds of visitors who brought him gifts. At first, Hitler fell into despair, even refusing food and speaking of suicide. But then his trial began in February 1924, and it became his stage. The sympathetic judge allowed Hitler to make lengthy speeches from the dock. For nearly a month, Hitler held forth about his life story and political worldview. German newspapers printed his words verbatim, and foreign journalists attended, transfixed by the spectacle. What should have been a conviction became free propaganda for Hitler's ideas. On April 1st, the verdict came. Hitler was convicted of treason but given only 5 years in fortress confinement, the lightest penalty possible. He would be eligible for parole after just 6 months. The politically biased clemency was obvious. Sympathetic judges saw Hitler as a misguided patriot rather than a traitor. Far from being silenced, Hitler left the courtroom as a folk hero among Germany's far right. His face and fiery words had been splashed across newspapers nationwide. Now, he would use his time in prison to write the book that would change history forever. In prison, Hitler's Nazi allies urged him to write a book. The party treasurer immediately recognized the money-making potential. Hitler's trial had made him famous, and controversy sells. Moreover, Hitler himself craved purpose during his idle hours in prison. Writing would serve a strategic goal. The failed coup had taught Hitler a harsh lesson. Power could not be seized by force alone. If he wanted to lead Germany, he must do it by legal means, by winning hearts and minds. A book would be the vehicle to refine his ideology and broadcast it widely, helping rebrand him from a failed revolutionary into a visionary leader. Hitler worked on the manuscript throughout 1924, typing late into the night on a portable typewriter. He originally wanted a grandiose title, but his publisher convinced him to shorten it to simply Mein Kampf, meaning My Struggle. By the time Hitler was released on December 20th, after serving just 9 months, he had completed Volume 1. He finished Volume 2 in 1926. What emerged was a book that would eventually sell over 12 million copies in Germany alone and be translated into more than a dozen languages. The tragedy is that Hitler wasn't hiding his intentions. He was announcing them, publishing them, distributing them to millions, and the world wasn't listening carefully enough. When Mein Kampf was published in July 1925, readers encountered a book unlike any typical political manifesto. It was intensely personal, weaving Hitler's life story together with his political ideology in a way designed to make his extremism seem like the natural result of lived experience rather than chosen prejudice. The book opens with Hitler's childhood in Austria, though what he writes is more myth than truth. He sanitizes his troubled family background and portrays himself as a self-made patriot. When describing his years in Vienna from 1908 to 1913, Hitler claims this is where he discovered the Jewish threat through observation and study, but he's lying. In reality, these were years of humiliation and failure. Hitler lived in homeless shelters and charity hostels, scraping by painting postcards. None of those embarrassing details appear in Mein Kampf. Instead, Hitler uses Vienna as a narrative device to frame his hatred as the product of insight, not personal bitterness. This tactic is insidious because he wraps hateful ideology in personal anecdote. He never says he decided to hate Jews. Instead, he offers a tale of reluctant enlightenment, claiming he was forced to recognize the Jewish threat through his own observations. By spinning his racism as discovered truth, Hitler presents his hatred as objective conclusion rather than chosen prejudice. This makes his extremism seem more credible to readers who don't recognize the manipulation. At the core of Hitler's worldview, hammered relentlessly in Mein Kampf, is a pseudo-scientific notion of race. For Hitler, every achievement or decline of civilization boiled down to racial purity or pollution. He reduces history to a racial struggle for dominance, claiming that Aryans, meaning Germanic peoples, are the only truly creative race responsible for all human culture and progress. Below this master race, Hitler arranged everyone else in descending order of worth. He considered Slavic peoples like Poles and Russians as subhumans destined to serve or die under German rule. At the absolute bottom stood the Jews, whom Hitler did not even regard as a normal race, but as a parasitic evil that had to be eradicated. Anti-Semitism wasn't just one theme in Mein Kampf. It was the central obsession. The word Jew appears approximately 373 times in the book, roughly once every 2 pages. Hitler's descriptions are relentlessly dehumanizing, comparing Jews to parasites, disease microbes, and vermin. He writes that Jews are like a noxious bacillus infecting the host nation. This wasn't mere metaphor. Hitler meant it literally. By framing his hatred in biological terms of infection and hygiene, Hitler primed his followers to see genocide as a form of necessary disinfection. Most chillingly, Hitler openly wished that Jews had been gassed during World War I, writing that if 12,000 or 15,000 Jews had been killed with poison gas, Germany's defeat could have been prevented. This passage from 1924 proves the Holocaust was no accidental later development. Its blueprint existed in Hitler's mind from the very beginning. Beyond anti-Semitism, Hitler's ideology contained several other crucial elements that would shape Nazi policy and lead to World War. First was his concept of Lebensraum, meaning living space. Hitler argued that Germany's growing population needed more territory to sustain itself. Where would this land come from? Hitler was explicit: the East. He targeted the Slavic lands of Poland, Ukraine, and Russia for German conquest and colonization. In a chapter titled Eastern Orientation, Hitler wrote with chilling clarity that Germany must stop its movement south and west and turn its gaze toward the land in the East. If we speak of soil in Europe, we can have in mind only Russia and her border states. This wasn't vague aspiration. This was a concrete program for expansionist war, and World War II followed this blueprint almost exactly. Second was Hitler's contempt for democracy and his advocacy for dictatorship. He dedicated entire chapters to explaining why democracy was weak and doomed to fail, arguing that nations needed authoritarian leadership, a single strong man who could impose his will without debate or opposition. Third, Hitler praised violence and militarism, seeing war not as tragedy but as natural and necessary, a test that strengthened races. Finally, Hitler was explicit about his methods. He openly stated the Nazi Party would crush all opposition, silence dissent, and establish a one-party state with absolute power. He even explained his propaganda techniques in detail, cynically observing that the masses have limited intelligence and must be manipulated through repetition and emotion. This is what makes Mein Kampf so historically significant and chilling. Hitler wasn't concealing his agenda, he was advertising it for anyone willing to read carefully. Understanding what Hitler said is crucial, but equally important is understanding how he said it. Mein Kampf is a masterclass in extremist rhetoric, and these methods remain disturbingly relevant today. The first technique was the big lie. Hitler wrote that colossal untruths are more believable than small lies because people can't imagine anyone would distort truth so completely. His conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the world, about Germany being betrayed rather than defeated, were so vast that many people assumed there must be some truth to them. The second technique was relentless scapegoating. Hitler provided simple answers to complex problems. Economic crisis? Blame the Jews. Military defeat? Jewish betrayal. This scapegoating served multiple functions. It absolved Germans of responsibility for their failures, transformed complex historical forces into a simple story of good versus evil, and gave people a specific target for their anger. The third technique was exploiting legitimate grievances. Not everything Hitler complained about was fabricated. The Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I truly was harsh and humiliating for Germany. Economic conditions truly were terrible. By mixing real problems with false solutions and scapegoats, Hitler made his extremism harder to dismiss. The fourth technique was strategic repetition. Hitler's writing style is famously turgid and repetitious, but this was intentional. He believed effective propaganda must focus on few points and repeat them endlessly until even the least attentive person absorbs them. This repetition creates what psychologists call the illusory truth effect. People believe something is true if they hear it often enough. At first, Mein Kampf was not a commercial success. The first edition sold only about 9,000 copies in its first year. Critics, even some Nazis, found it tedious and bombastic. But then came 1930 and everything changed. The Great Depression hit Germany catastrophically. Unemployment skyrocketed, businesses collapsed, and millions lost their savings. In this climate of desperation, Hitler's simple explanations and promises of national revival suddenly resonated. Nazi party support surged from 2.6% in 1928 to 18.3% in 1930. As Hitler's political fortunes rose, so did Mein Kampf sales. By 1933, when Hitler became chancellor, the book sold 850,000 copies that year alone. It became virtually mandatory for every German household. Newlyweds received free copies. Schools distributed it. By 1944, over 12 million copies were in circulation, though many Germans owned it only as a symbol of loyalty without actually reading it. Those who did read it often dismissed the most extreme passages as political exaggeration, convincing themselves Hitler didn't really mean what he wrote. This was a fatal miscalculation. Once in power, Hitler implemented his written blueprint with systematic determination. The connection between Mein Kampf and the Holocaust is direct and undeniable. The dehumanizing language, the conspiracy theories, the explicit calls for Jewish elimination all appeared in the book years before Hitler had power to act on them. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 that stripped Jews of citizenship followed Mein Kampf's racial hierarchy. The invasion of Poland and Russia fulfilled the book's call for Eastern expansion. The systematic murder of 6 million Jews in gas chambers echoed Hitler's 1924 wish that Jews had been gassed in World War I. The road from Mein Kampf to Auschwitz was direct and traceable. After World War II ended in 1945, the question arose: what should be done with Mein Kampf? Allied authorities recognized the book's power and danger. The copyright fell to the state of Bavaria, which held it for 70 years and refused to allow republication in Germany. This wasn't censorship in the traditional sense. Bavaria used copyright law to prevent the book's spread. The goal was to let Hitler's words fade from memory. But this strategy had unintended consequences. By making the book forbidden, it gained mystique. Underground copies circulated. Neo-Nazis treated it as sacred text. Extremists outside Germany published and distributed it freely. The internet age made suppression impossible anyway. Digital copies spread worldwide.